He's going to join us virtually.
Perfect. Oh, that's what it is.
Mr. Mayor, you're live.
Thank you. I'll call to order this meeting of the Appointments Committee for Thursday, November 7th, 2024. President Arhoy.
Nishioka. Nordyke.
And we'll have Councilor Stapleton. She's in the waiting room now. She just texted me and there she's.
I see her name.
We'll give her 1 second.
I'm here.
Thank you
I'm
for joining
sorry.
us, Councilor. We're literally just getting started, so your timing is impeccable.
She knew.
Yeah. All right. I think we're just going to go directly to Moss Adams then. Annie Rose, is that you?
Yes, that's right. So thank you so much for giving us more of your time today. I think this will likely be our last meeting together on some of these governance group topics. So I'm going to, as per usual, bring up, we have a presentation with some discussion questions for you on some of the final topics that we wanted to get through together. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. So as a reminder, we are talking about governance groups and potential updates to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of those groups. We are focusing just on the boards and commissions as part of this work, even though the overarching project here, we are also looking at neighborhood associations and city charter, but those elements will hit a little later on in this process. So today we wanted to come back to the counselor liaison framework. So how do we decide which groups get counselor liaisons? And then also looking at evaluating governance groups. So the process that might be turned into a council policy related to reviewing the purpose and effectiveness of groups, as well as reviewing whether or not new groups should be added. So we want to have a discussion there on some potential options. And then we have next steps to round out all of the pieces that we've been talking about over the last few meetings and giving you a preview of where that's headed at the December 2nd council meeting. So to get us straight in, counselor liaison framework, as you may remember the prior discussion, we were interested in having at least some governance groups have counselor liaisons and wanting to have a consistent framework for making a decision about when that might happen. So we wanted to bring forward a draft, get your thoughts and response to that. So the framework itself, which would eventually be turned into a council policy, would obviously go through what is the purpose, why do we have council liaisons, how do we request to have one set up. But I think the most important things would be the selection criteria. And so right now we have 4 on this list. We would love to get your feedback on these. But the first would be if the governance group is dealing with a fairly complex topic or a topic that might require significant policy change, using that as kind of the first measure for whether or not the group would really benefit from having a liaison. We also wanted to look at scope, potential impact on the community. So if there's something that has broad scale impacts on the community, or the broader the potential impact, the higher the chances of having a counselor liaison would be a benefit there. The third criteria would just be alignment with council priorities. So if there's any areas that the council is very significantly focused on within the upcoming year, it would make sense to have a liaison serving on groups that support those priority areas, purely to ensure that there is good alignment across how we are thinking about those priorities. And then finally, thinking also about counselor interest. So if there are no council members who are interested in serving as a liaison, does this mean that the group would not receive a liaison? We want to make sure that there's counselor capacity to take those pieces on. So if this is your draft framework, my question for you all is, does this provide sufficient level of detail? Are there any criteria that you would want to see on this list that are not there yet? Or do you have any other feedback about the draft potential criteria that we've proposed here?
Looks good to me. My feeling is less is more, less prescriptive, because then you always have the option for getting into more detail, but it's hard to back away from detail if it's outlined there. So this looks good to me in general. Does anybody else have thoughts?
No, I think it's pretty comprehensive. The only thing that I wondered about was the comment land use, since, you know,
Where's that at?
it's in the first bullet point, issues, and then in parentheses, land use or infrastructure.
Oh, yeah, I would change that example, probably.
I just, because we're being advised to be very cautious on any land use issues. I would offer if you have any other suggestions besides the words land use.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could just take that out. It was mostly for illustrative purposes, so we could just remove those examples.
Sounds good.
Great.
Virginia, do you have any?
She gave a thumbs up.
Oh, did she? Okay, thank you. I didn't see
Thumbs
it.
up from me, it looks good.
Gotcha, thank you.
Great.
As long as they're wordsmithing to that level, I don't know if any of the counselors had concern about using the term counselor interest,
Yeah, that one did. I was like, well,
maybe capacity.
Capacity or
Yeah.
availability, yeah, something like that might be better. Interest implies that we would be disinterested when that isn't something we should be.
yeah, I would probably change the word interest to capacity or availability or.
Absolutely. Great. And we can, obviously, this language would go through a process to turn it into policy language as well, but that's very helpful to know some of the thematic areas that we want to be highlighting or focusing on here.
What is BCA?
Oh, this group. Yeah.
Boards and Commissions Appointment Committee,
Oh, okay.
I think.
That's what I read it as
Yeah.
well.
Sounds better than BCAC.
I like BCAC better.
I'm laughing at all of that.
BCAC. BCAC kind of describes it a little sometimes.
Maybe you could have capital B, capital C, capital A, and then a little c.
Well, my cat does, so we be careful.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Sounds like that.
I was thinking one of the cartoons where the cat always is vomiting. What's his name? Anyway, sorry, we digress.
Garfield, is that what I'm thinking? No, it was something. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, then I think that we are in a good place on this one, unless anyone has final thoughts.
I think
Okay.
we're good.
Yeah, I think that covered the only thing I was.
Great. And I think this was just a reminder of which groups currently have those liaisons, but I'm assuming that we would want to move forward and get the approval of the overarching framework and then kind of review all of the groups to see which additional liaison positions we might want to put in place.
Yeah.
So, Annie Rose, can I ask a question? I see the wastewater, the water wastewater task force. There's also other task force that come on, but I believe that they're not regular. I know the wastewater one is every 2 years, so I assume that's why it's on this list.
Yep, that's right, because it's more of a standing group than most of the task forces that are very time limited.
And the equity roundtable is on this list. I believe Eunice Kim recently reached out to Colleen or someone about that because there seems to be a lot of uncertainty as to kind of like that role of that group, but
Yeah.
it was explained to me that once you've kind of worked through this process, then that will be explained better.
So the equity roundtable is a staff thing. It's not a council thing. Now, we do have a representative now, but it's kind of a funky thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit unique in terms of the groups that are on this list because I think it's the only one here that is not a formal commission or board that does not go through the same processes as the rest of the groups here. We wanted to include it because it provides advisory services to the city. And so that's that we wanted to capture that fact that this group is acting in that way, even though it is structured differently than most of the other groups on this list. So I think that question of, I know that when we had spoken with Eunice, there was some question around, do we need to formalize this group, kind of maintain in the structure that it has been? And our assessment did not speak to that question. We mostly just wanted to have it included as part of the conversations because we know that it's providing important advisory services.
The key for me though is that it's a staff appointment. It's not a council or mayor appointment. And so it's a little bit confusing to include it in this group.
And I'm thinking too, we can probably denote that it's kind of unique position then.
There are others like that
That are not on here.
that are not on here.
We'll follow up on that then.
Like, like the chief has the chief of police has an advisory group or something. The city manager put together a group working on the city hall seismic retrofit. So there are a variety of different staff initiated groups that really aren't, there might be members of council on them, but they're not council groups.
Great. Okay. We'll make that distinction then.
Water wastewater task force is also one of those.
Yeah, it is. Actually, water wastewater task force, we don't appoint those people. That's staff appointment.
Aren't we going to be doing away with Civil Service Commission? I know we had talked about that.
I had talked to the former fire chief and a while back about that, and he was very reluctant to take that out of the charter. And so we would still need it as long as it's in the charter. I think the IFF was pretty fond of having that in the charter, so that would be a bit of a lift.
I see. Okay.
So Annie Rose, again, back to the questions, you have the asterisk by the Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Is that one also more, so it's an advisory, it's not really a committee, because I think it hasn't,
That one has a liaison, that's why there's an asterisk.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Airport advisory, Salem Parks and Rec Advisory Board, they have liaisons.
I think the counselor on that advisory board may not, I think the current one may not realize that it's advisory. I think she's very involved.
She understands
Okay.
what her role is. I appointed her and we talked about it beforehand, so no, she knows.
All right, well then we'll make that distinction and pull out the staff appointed groups separately and move forward. Okay. So the other, that's exciting. The other piece that we wanted to share with you was coming back to this process of evaluating the governance groups. You might remember that our last conversation about this, the decision from this group is, yes, we want a review process to evaluate governance groups. And then there's been also some discussion about kind of expanding this, because originally we were just looking at should the groups be consolidated or sunset, but also thinking about, okay, if we're evaluating overall, that is also an opportunity to think about if there's additional groups that might need to be added to. And so we wanted to expand that framework that would be used. Again, this would eventually turn into a council policy, but expanding the framework to account for that. So the idea here is that if you're receiving annual progress reports from every group, then on an annual basis, you could consider very, very short review process just to check and make sure, okay, based on the work that this group has done in the past year, do we need to consider consolidation or sunsetting? And the review criteria for both of those things would be thinking about consolidation if multiple groups share similar process or purposes or have some degree of overlap. Sunsetting if the group is no longer fulfilling a high priority need for the community, or if the group has really struggled, for example, to meet quorum within the past year or has been fairly dormant. So those would be pieces that as part of that annual progress report, you're already going to be receiving information on things like how frequently did we meet? What did we accomplish in the past year? So we think that that would give a sufficient amount of information to quickly, consider both of those two topics there. But we also, the piece that is new here is looking at how do we decide when it makes sense to add a new group as well. And the 3 criteria that were discussed was the idea that the group has a distinct purpose that no other group is fulfilling or couldn't feasibly be fulfilled by expanding the scope of an existing group. That the purpose would be very well aligned with the city's goals, and making sure that we have a clear understanding of the fact that this group would be actively moving the city toward any established goals that we have. And then finally, and this is perhaps the most important one, that the city has sufficient staff to effectively support the groups. And this, I did want to flag that because part of the original governance assessment, one of the reasons for looking at that was saying, okay, we really want to make sure that all of our governance groups are functioning as effectively as possible for the city, because we know that they require really significant staff resources. And given where the city is at with its budget challenges, we want to make sure that, again, we are using staff time as effectively as possible. So I think that last criteria is going to be fairly significant. So those would be the evaluative criteria that we would recommend. Any thoughts, feedback, any other changes that you'd want to see here?
Looks pretty good to me. I do feel like the last bullet point does need to be highlighted, because that really is going to be the limiting factor.
Yep. Thumbs up from me.
Great. Seeing thumbs up from Stapleton as well. So 2 questions then for this team. We, at previous meetings, a bike ped commission and a disability commission have both been raised as potential topics. We did a little bit more research on the bike ped commission that was asked for in the last meeting. So I'm happy to share the what we found there and some potential recommendations for that. However, I'm wondering whether it makes sense to bring this framework forward to council for approval, or potentially putting this into a council policy. And then after it is approved, come back to those 2 other groups and make decisions about whether it makes sense to move forward with them or not, so that you could actually use the framework to help inform that conversation. Any thoughts on that?
I guess I'll go. Sure. I think that when we are setting up frameworks, that's, if that's something that the group wants to do, I think that's great. I always, of course, I would love to have a voice in this conversation. I don't know with timing wise if I would be still around to have a voice in that conversation, but I know that there's support in the community too, that I could rally folks to come provide public comment to this public meeting if we needed to, or something like that. But anyway, I'm interested to see what my colleagues think.
That would be my concern as well. This was Virginia's idea, and ideally, I'd like her to be able to weigh in on it. So yeah, my only concern is that timing wise, I think it's really important she can speak to all of her work from Salem Bike Vision as to why this is a good idea. So timing is my same concern.
So that would bring up the question, Annie Rose, if we would try to have it added to this group, that then its governance guidelines would be within what you're establishing for the others. I don't know. It's a tough call.
Well, how about I share the pieces that we have on the bike ped position, and then we can kind of see where we want to go from there. High level, we looked across 5 other Oregon cities to see how their bike ped commission might be set up. And looking at least in Eugene and Bend, they have single transportation committees that speak to a wide range of multimodal transportation in both of those areas. Corvallis is similar in terms of they have a multimodal committee there, but then they also have a time-limited safe streets and roads task force. So they have a standing committee, and then it's being supplemented essentially by this other group that is intended to be limited in its duration. Portland has two groups, one for pedestrians, one for bikes, and Medford actually has 3 groups that are overlapping here as well. So we can come back to this, but when our team was looking at these pieces, especially knowing that there is not a single way that this is being done, we were seeing kind of 3 options that could be moved forward here: establishing a standalone bike ped commission, establishing a transportation commission that would be a little bit broader, that would incorporate bike ped, but speak to a wider range there, or looking at the traffic commission and expanding that out to a more general transportation commission that might focus on both traffic related pieces as well as bike ped. And so if we were using the framework here that we just discussed, these would be the 3 questions that you all could answer in terms of: does a bike ped commission have a distinct purpose? Is it well aligned with our city priorities? Do we have sufficient staff and resources to effectively support this? From the Moss Adams perspective, looking at some of these questions, it seems like option 3, expanding the traffic commission to incorporate transportation commission, might be the most effective way forward here, because then we can be, not reinventing the wheel. We're using resources that we're already having, and we're not, yes, this would obviously change the work of that group, but it would give you an option to not add additional staff support or resources, because we wouldn't be adding a 3rd group. So given that level of information, I'm curious what the group would like to do at this point in time.
Go ahead, Virginia.
I have a question. Did you talk to staff about this at all, and what was their feedback?
We have not talked with staff about this, no.
Do we know who the liaison is for transportation, or the traffic commission that we have?
Yeah,
When we say traffic commission, we're referring to Kathy.
Patsy,
I guess so.
Eduardo Diaz.
Was the question how many people we have on there?
No, it's who's the staff
Who's the
liaison.
staff person? That's
Okay.
who I was trying to understand.
Sorry, I just didn't hear you.
I'll try to speak louder.
Dan's pulling it up right now.
I think it's Eduardo Diaz. Oh, Tony Martin or Katsy. Tony Martin, Kevin Hopman are the 2. So Tony.
Annie Rose, last time we talked about this, didn't you say you had spoken to them and they had a reluctance of expanding Katsy to include this?
We had spoken in general. I think that there is concern at the staff level about either expanding groups or adding new groups, because there's such a concern about staff capacity in general right now. So that might have been part of the conversation. But I don't believe, unless Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe we have specifically spoken to that staff liaison for this group.
I would just like to say, I have meetings with city manager, and we talk about this quite a bit, because this is one of the things that I really would like to move forward before my term is done. Not only because I see that there's a critical need for this, but because we are really kind of in the middle of updating our transportation master plan, and just so much happening right now with transportation. So I feel awkward right now talking about this, because I definitely hear what staff are saying, and I don't know who said staff is, that there is constraints and concerns, and I think all of us on this committee share that, not only with staff but with volunteers, and like all of the work that needs to get done, in the lack of bodies to perform that work. I also really stand firm on my ideas about the needs for such a committee, and my alignment with the city manager on this idea. So I just feel like in a really weird place with this right now. So I'm actually hoping to just express that right now and really lean on my colleagues for their expertise and maybe their ability to stand a little bit farther away from my passion and advocacy for the issue to maybe help guide this conversation. So I'm going to stop talking.
I don't know enough about what the role of the Patsy currently is in their scope to know if it's a good fit. So it's difficult for me to speak to that. I would say we need to engage with staff on a more robust level to figure out what's the best path forward. So maybe how about this? Like, why don't we table this for right now and let Virginia do a little bit more legwork? And figure out maybe a path that staff supports and that we can live with, to figure out what the best solution would be. Does that work for you, Virginia?
It does, and I think that's great. I have a meeting with Brian next week and with Keith, and
Perfect.
so I'm gonna really try and write out all of the reasons why I think that it's important that we have this, not only with the Transportation Master Plan update, but the Vision Zero and all of the different things that we have going on.
Yeah.
And take that to those two folks who are in a position of leadership to maybe help understand how staff could help and how the community could come around the issue. So I'll do that work and get back to y'all.
Thank you.
So Virginia, I would just like to add that we constantly as counselors are spoken to about traffic issues. And a lot of it is pedestrian. So my first thought is traffic commission the title might need to be just changed to transportation and have that all of the aspects of multimodal, including pedestrian. But again, I don't know if that becomes too much, but it would seem to me just keeping transportation master plan, keeping them all termed similarly would be helpful. And I believe that there would be a lot of public interest, especially if there were opportunities about pedestrian crossings and pedestrian safety.
My only concern is that if we leave it at Transportation Commission, I mean, that kind of puts transportation first. And I think that what Virginia is trying to do here is to put more of an emphasis on the non-car modes of transportation. So
Multimodal transportation, and I understand what you're trying to do, but at the same time, I get concerned that if there's two groups that aren't talking to each other, that's an issue. So if they're a single group talking about all of the transportation concerns, it then unifies the conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that maybe we need to really look at what CATSI does and see that if it does that need to change to be more multimodal in and of itself. And I know that on another city, they had a transportation kind of multimodal transportation commission, but then they had a task force. And I wonder if there's a need to kind of change a little bit of the purview of what CATSI does, but maybe start a limited duration task force for Vision Zero. In the implementation of that project, or, those are kind of some of the things in my mind right now that I'm going to talk to Brian and Keith about.
sounds good.
Thank you.
I just want to say ditto to the whole conversation. And again, it'd be nice if we could, maybe if this is something that can be done before end of year. I think we're all on the same page. We want a multimodal lens when we talk about transportation. We want the impact for everybody, not just the cars, but pedestrians, bikes. I think we're all on the same page here, and we're just trying to figure out how best to accomplish that. And so I think we're united in that purpose, and I appreciate, Virginia, your willingness to go and do a little more homework on this with the staff, because I think this needs to be a thing. I worry about creating a standalone commission because, like Linda said, and I think we talked about this at our last BCA meeting, BCAC meeting, that if it's a standalone commission, it may not talk to the CATSI people. And if CATSI people are the ones who make all the more important decisions, or, I wouldn't want Bike and Pedestrian Commission to be adrift, an island unto itself with no real teeth to it to make an impact on our transportation decisions. So I want to avoid that situation, making them feel like they're at the kids' table with no real say in anything.
Thank you. I agree. I'll do my best and I'll get back to y'all.
Thank you.
In terms of the framework itself and these questions, would it make sense, just given this conversation, I'm wondering if it would make sense to add to this list touching like staff opinion or staff recommendation? Is that a criteria that you would have interest in adding here, since it sounds like it's coming up in the actual example of the Bike Ped Commission?
Absolutely. I mean, many
Yeah.
of these things we have zero experience with. Like
Yeah.
the only time we deal with these commissions or committees is when we're appointing somebody to them. Like now some of them we have a heavy involvement, but there are some of these that I couldn't tell you what CATSI does.
Yeah.
I have no idea what they actually do. You know, there are a few like that. Like I've never spoken to them. I've never met with them. You know, so it's the staff people, and it's not just the liaison, but the department head also, because the liaison can have a different perspective sometimes.
Yeah, great. Okay, we can add that in. All right. All right, well then moving us through, we'll put a pin in those pieces. We wanted to share our plan for the elements that we have discussed to date. So there's a series of pieces that we are hoping to bring forward to the December 2nd council meeting that this group has discussed. The first three, the annual reporting, annual work plans, counselor liaison framework, and the governance group review consideration process, those would essentially be brought forward to say, we have ideas, are we ready to direct staff to develop the related council policy that would be based on the specifics that this group had discussed. Sunsetting combination, that is one that we imagine for the URA conversation that we might direct or ask council to direct staff to begin the process of combining those urban renewal advisory boards. In terms of CPRB, we at your November 25th meeting, Gretchen will be coming back to present some additional information on that topic as well. So that may or may not hit the December 2nd meeting, but that's the current plan there. And then in terms of standardizing bylaws and the application updates, both of those are really more operational. And so the direction there, we'd be bringing them forward on December 2nd, but just directing staff to implement the changes to make both of those move forward. And then finally, I did want to note that this group had discussed wanting to standardize eligibility requirements, and that work is ongoing. Our team is working on that right now, but we don't think it's going to be ready for that December 2nd meeting. So that would be reviewed in 2025. So how does this look to you all? Any questions about sort of where all these pieces are going to hit?
Looks fine to me.
Yeah, I agree.
And then we'll add potential bike ped pieces. I'm assuming that might also come up at your November 25th meeting as well. And we'll see where we get on that as well.
I do have a question. So it says that you would be presenting on December 2nd to council, and then you say direct staff to implement. Are these going to require motions brought at the December 2nd meeting to move forward?
I believe so, but I'm going to defer to Dan.
The way I would do it is this committee would make a recommendation, sort of a slate of things to do like that says, and that would be in the report that goes to council, and we could either do it as a special order of business or just as a consent calendar item.
Okay.
Yes, the answer to your question is yes.
That's what I'm trying to get at. It's like, so I want to make sure that we don't do all this work and then nothing happens. I'd like to make sure we have an actual actionable item on it. Okay.
All right. Well, I think that was the last piece that I had for you all. Anything else that we should discuss as a group before we get prepping for that December 2nd meeting?
Did you have anything? All right, don't think so.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks,
all.
everybody. Bye.
At what time?
Is this the, Dan, is this the latest? I've been